Starfleet Battles is a game that is now a classic of gaming, and I should say especially specifically of wargaming. It came out some decades ago, it is still around, it is still being played, a true classic. It is a game of tactical combat set in the sci-fi universe of Star Trek TOS, the only Star Trek, that is what the acronym is for. So it came out a couple of years ago, decades ago I should say, and it is notoriously a super complex game. It is the advanced squad leader of sci-fi. But yet there must be a lot of good things in it because it did become a classic, it was played, and it is still played. But it kind of always scared me a little bit. I was always a bit afraid. Luckily enough, recently I learned that there is a streamlined version of that game that came out some years ago, and that game is called Federation Commander. And I was curious about this one because I do like tactical combat, I do like sci-fi, and now there was a version that appeared to be not like a 200, 300 pages manual, but only 50 pages of rules, 50, 70, actually depending on the core set that you pick up. That seemed to be demanding but manageable, something that I could teach myself, because notoriously when you have these very complex games such as Advanced Squad Leader, the best way of learning them is from somebody who knows them already. But Federation Commander, it seems something that I could pick up and learn by myself and then maybe teach it to other players. Also recently, Leonard Nimoy passed away. That is something that saddened me very much because I really admired him for the role that he played in Star Trek. He just brought so much to that role. It was so interesting, so innovative. If you want, playing Federation Commander and making a video about this game is also my way of paying a small, very minuscule tribute to him. So here is a video about Federation Commander, the war game of tactical combat set in the universe of Star Trek TOS. But actually this is only one of the 2 videos that I'm filming, and maybe there will be more in the future. The system is complex enough that I thought if I give you just the basics of the system, this video is going to be long enough. But then there are also different products that you can choose to enter the system. So I'm going to make a separate video about the products, the titles, the games, the expansions that you may want to choose when you want to give a first try to the system, and maybe in case you decide to explore the system further. So today, and in this video in particular, we're going to talk simply about Federation Commander, the system, the basic rules, the basic concept, the basics ideas. In this video we'll simply scratch the surface of the system, which is still fairly complex, much more complex than many other games or war games out there. But what is good is that you can learn a basic system of rules, which is more or less the one that I'm covering today. I will not cover even everything of the basic ideas. And then you can start playing with those, and then you simply can add stuff. You can add ships with different armaments that will need special rules. You can add other ships to do other stuff, and they need other rules. There are certain procedures that any and every ship could perform, but you simply don't have to use them from the first time you play the game. So what is good about the system is that while it is demanding, when you're playing with all the rules, you do not have to play with all the rules to start with. Even if you're just playing with the basic rules, you have something that is already quite rewarding to play. Ooh, anticipation of my conclusions. Okay, let me show you how Federation Commander works. Each vessel in the game is represented by a counter that goes on the map, and then also important, each vessel is represented by a card, such as this one, a laminated card, which is 2-sided. One represents the unit as seen at the squadron scale, and the other one is seen as the fleet scale. The 2 sides are functionally identical. The only difference is that the squadron side has more boxes. which means that it is harder to destroy a ship as seen at the squadron scale than it is to destroy the same ship at the fleet scale. So you use the fleet scale when you want to have a quicker game, or you have a game with a large number of units and you don't want to the game to take forever. You use this one if you want a more detailed game, and if you are playing a duel, or in any case a game with a number of ships it's not too large. Boxes, when you mark them, it is because they have taken a damage, so that's never too good. And here you have shields all around your ship, and then boxes of different colors indicate different things. The pink boxes indicate weapons, and each weapon has a code that tells you the type of weapon that it is and the arc that the weapon is firing at. Some boxes for hull, and then other functional things such as bridge or emergency area. Yellow, this yellow here is transporters, shuttles that you can use for various functions, battery, super important, and light blue boxes, which are the ones that generate energy. Energy is the key concept in the game. At the beginning of each turn, you count the number of light blue boxes that you still have operational, and that represents the number of energy points that you have available for that turn. You may have also saved energy points from the previous turn, and the number of energy points that you can save from one turn and use in the other is cannot be higher than the number of batteries that you still have available. I have 5 batteries. I can save up to 5 points of energy from one turn to the other. So at the beginning of the turn, you determine your number of energy points. Suppose here I start with 31, then you make a mark to indicate where you are. There are various ways to do this. You can mark it with an erasable marker. You can use counters. You can use paper clips that you slide up and down. Various ways. You can keep a running tally. It doesn't matter as long as you have the ability of keeping track of a number that will change many times during the turn. So at the beginning of the turn, you set the you define the energy for your ship, and then you have to start spending it. The game comes with several play rates. This double-sided, very well-made play rate is one such play rate, and it is the most important one. You have almost everything that you need to get started with the game in this play rate. And here you have a very detailed turn sequence. Fret not, it is not as scary as it looks, even though there are many steps. At the beginning of each turn, you calculate available power, then you set the baseline speed. The baseline speeds can be 8, 0, 8, 16, or 24. Imagine these as gears, and that means that more or less the baseline speed that you decide at the beginning of the turn will represent the number of hexes that your ship will move. Again, more or less, there are ways of altering that a little bit. Each ship has a cost that it's indicated here, and this is the cost that it takes the ship has to pay to, let's say, to buy a movement point. That means that if I want to set a baseline speed of 8, then I calculate the fact that 8 is 8 movement points that I'm buying, and each movement point costs 3 quarters of a point of energy. Seems complicated, but luckily enough, the math has been done for you here. Because if you set the baseline speed base speed of 8, then the speed cost is 6. Base speed of 16, the speed cost is here. So don't worry about that. It will be useful in other situations, but you don't have to do too much math. So at the beginning of the turn, you decide the speed that you want to move at, and suppose that I want to move at 16. I mark it right there, and I immediately subtract the number of energy points that I spend to set that base speed. There are other things that you do or you may do at the beginning of this of the turn, but the most important one is to decide the speed. Then you start playing the turn itself. The turn is divided in 8 impulses, and each impulse has a movement phase followed by a combat phase, and a part of the turn in which players will move following restrictions given by their speed, and then they have a chance to attack. Why 8 impulses? Because this simply indicates the fact that if you purchase the base speed of 8, you will get to move once per impulse. If you purchase 16, you move twice per impulse, and if you purchase 24, you will move 3 times per impulse. So as you can see at the end, if you move 3 times per impulse, 8 impulses, you moved by 24 hexes, you moved 24 times. How does this work? Well, this is the interesting thing. It is not like you move all of your movement points, then I move mine. There's a very interesting way, if a little laborious at the beginning, to resolve simultaneous movement at different speeds. Each impulse is divided in 4 movement subpulses in which nothing but movement happens. And each subpulse will tell you here, the play rate, which ships move in that subpulse. For example, in subpulse 2, the ships that have speed of 16 and 24 will move. Then the following subpulse, the ship that has 24 will move again, and then the last subpulse, 8, 16, and 24 will move. So as you can see, 24 will move 3 times, 16 will move 2 times, and 8 will move 1 time. But as you can see, these are spread out in interesting ways. And within the same band of speed, the slowest ships get to move first. As you can see, there are also some numbers marked there with a +1, because at the beginning of an impulse, you can buy an extra movement point for that impulse. You pay the corresponding energy cost, and then in that impulse, you read you read the numbers that indicate your base speed, and also the ones that indicate your base speed +1. So if I'm moving at 8 as base speed, and I'm spending an energy point here, I will move in this subpulse here and in this subpulse here. If I'm at 24, spend an extra point, then I will move in all 4 subpulses, 24 +1, 24, 24, and 24. You can also, during the subpulses, decelerate, which means you spend an amount of energy that would be required to purchase a movement point. Again, it's indicated here, 3/4, deceleration is 3/4, and purchasing deceleration cancels your movement for that subpulse. It simply means that you're not moving for that subpulse. Suppose I'm 24, I move here, then I move here, then now I decide not to move for this subpulse, I spend a point to decelerate, so in this impulse I only move twice instead of 3. There's also another procedure, which is emergency deceleration. This you have to declare at the beginning of an impulse. You simply stop movement entirely. You recover some of your energy, which you can use to reinforce your shields, but then you cannot move for the rest of the turn. You can also choose to move in reverse, and that costs twice as much as it costs to move forward. Now, as we said, you purchase speed using energy at the beginning, and then you can decelerate, accelerate, but you do get to move. When you move, it is very simple. You simply move, usually in the hex, right in front of you. Orientation is important, so your counter needs to always be facing a side, not a corner, and needs to be facing a side clearly, so you know where the ship is going and facing. So standard movement, when you move in a subpulse, you move right in the front hex. You can turn, however, and when you can turn by 60 degrees, no more, but you cannot turn too often. After you turn, there's a certain number of hexes that you need to travel before you can turn again. And that number of hexes is determined by your turn mode. So you look at your ship card and you look at the box with the base speed. Suppose I'm traveling at base speed 16 with that ship. My turn mode is 3. That means that after I took a turn, I need to move at least 3 hexes straight before I can take another turn. And you simply use a marker to indicate the hex in which you turn. So then that is a good reminder of when it is that you can finally turn again. Other thing that you can do is to slip, which means that you're still moving forward, but instead of entering the exit right in front of you, instead of crossing the exit right in front of you, you can cross the front right or the front left without changing orientation. There's also a slip mode, which indicates the number of exits that you need to move forward through before you can slip again. The slip mode is simply of 1. So between turn mode and slip mode, you do have some maneuverability. You do get to go where you need to go, if you can fly these vessels well, because you also have restrictions which, while not crippling, are indeed challenging, and that is part of the fun of the game. Now, after the sub-pulses have been resolved, suppose that after we moved, this is the situation. After the sub-pulses have been resolved, each impulse has a combat phase, which is divided in various phases. First, defensive fire. There are some weapons that are seeking weapons. They are represented by counters that are placed on the board. For example, drones or plasma torpedoes. They simply move during the movement phase of the impulse. And if they reach their targets, they are placed on the card of the target. Suppose the drone reached that ship in this turn, in this impulse, through that hex site, then we place the counter representing the drone in this on this shield here. This effect, this attack from the seeking weapons will be resolved during the defensive fire, when the attacked player may get to fire anti-drone devices, if the ship has any, can try to fire against the incoming drone with a phaser, and ships that resolve defensive fire are the only ships that are allowed to use phasers in this phase. And then also the ship may be able to tractor the incoming drone. Suppose that all other defenses fail, then, and if the ship has a tractor beam that still works, then you can hold the incoming drone in position, but you had then to spend energy from turn to turn to keep it in position, and hope that your tractor beam is not disabled, because in that case then the drone hits immediately. But holding the drone there, even though the drone is still pushing against you, is a good way of buying time, and maybe to then try to hit the drone with a weapon during the next combat phase of the next impulse. After defensive fire is resolved, in case it needs to be resolved, you have offensive fire. Designate, execute, mark, very complex way of saying just choose your target and fire. Other things may happen. There may be other functions that need to be resolved. For example, in the other phase of the impulse is when the Romulans turn on their cloaking device. And then you have the launch phase, which is when you launch seeking weapons such as drones or torpedoes and shuttles. This is a cool thing. Shuttles are pretty much suicide shuttles. Players may have some on their ships. You spend energy points to arm them. You program them to hit the opponent, and you're simply then sending them out in space unmanned to try to hit the opponent. And weapons of this kind that you place on the board and you move as seeking weapons are launched at the end of an impulse. But now let's talk about the offensive fire, which is definitely the most important form of fire in the game. During the offensive fire phase, you may fire any and all of your weapons that haven't fired the turn yet, and that apply, that can reach the target, that can see the target, and that you can actually fuel with energy. Suppose, for example, I decide to fire this weapon here, which is a phaser type 1, and the box indicating the weapon also tells me the arc of the weapon. When you fire a weapon, you need to make a mark somewhere on the card to indicate that the weapon has fired that turn. Usually weapons can fire once per turn, and there is a section of the card that you use to indicate the weapons that you used. For example, if I want to fire that one as weapon 3, then I indicate that I fired weapon 3, so I don't fire it again by mistake this turn. Another way is simply to place a mark by the box, not in the box, because you mark the box itself only when the weapon is hit and is disabled. So now I know I'm firing phaser 1 that reaches arc LM LS. Here on the player aid, you have an indication of how the arc works. Simply the 6 hexes surrounding the firing ship are divided in 6 areas, left front, left rear, and then the corresponding R. This weapon here fires at LX, covers the LX arc, which simply means, as you can see here, left rear, left, and left front. So anything on the left of the ship. Yes, it takes a while to become familiar with what all the codes cover, because those codes may cover different combinations of these 6 basic arcs. So I confirmed that the opponent is on this side, I can fire, now I count the number of hexes that separates the firing ship from the target, and then I pick up the player aid again and then look for the table, the combat table that I used to resolve the fire with the weapon that I'm using. Phaser 1, it's super simple. I roll a die, only d6s I use in this game. I roll a die and I use the raw indicated by the line indicated by the result, cross-reference that with the range that I'm firing at, and that tells me the number of damage points that I inflict on the opponent. We determine the angle at which I hit my opponent based on the hex side that I crossed. When I reach the opponent, I cross with my weapon. Suppose that I hit my opponent through this shield here, then I simply mark the corresponding number of hit points on that shield. As a shield gets hit, the ship that is hit can use power from the remaining energy to absorb hits. And when you do that, you can use power equal to or lower than the number of batteries that you still have available. For example, I received 5 hit points here, and I decide to spend 3 energy points, which I can because I have 3 batteries, and that reduces the number of hit points that I received by 3. You can absorb damage as it comes, but of course you may not have much energy, or you may want to save for something later, in which case you simply accept the damage. The damage is absorbed by shields as long as you had those shields, and sometimes one or more of your shields are in terrible conditions, then you're starting to maneuver desperately to hope that the opponent will hit towards shields that are still there, still strong, because if a hit comes to you and there is not a shield to stop it, then the hit is assigned to the main part of your ship. Also, for each 10 points of damage that you receive on your shields on a single volley, there is a burning through. That is, if you receive 10 or more points, at least one of them simply is assigned against your vessel, and the remaining ones against your shield. If I receive 25 points of damage in a single volley, 2 go here, and the remaining ones on the shield. And maybe then those will take on the shield and will hit here. Anyways, when you're determining the location of your damage, of your internal damage, you look at this table here, I should say at the system of tables. You roll a d6, and that indicates the line or the table that you will read. Suppose I rolled a 3, then I start reading from here, and I start reading left to right, assigning damage up to the number of damage points that I need to assign. I read the top line first. Suppose I have 3 points of damage, then 1 hits the transporter, 1 the lab, and 1 the rear hull. Suppose I have 7, then I simply go trans, lab, these, hull here, and 1 hit takes down a battery. So you simply cross the boxes as you go. It may be, however, that the box that you're reading indicates a box that you don't have anymore, you never had, in which case you read the bottom alternative instead. Suppose that I'm hit here, table 2, I don't have any phasers anymore, then I assign a hit on a drone. Suppose you don't have either, then you simply keep reading, but it's skipped, but not condoned, it's not forgotten. So it simply means that in that section there, you did not assign one of your hit points. You will have to assign it later. Suppose that I need to assign 10 points, and as I was reading this line here, There were 2 cases in which I skipped, so of the 10 points I needed to assign, only 8 were positively assigned when I reached the final the end of the line here. Then I rolled the die again and I start reading maybe the same table, maybe another one, until I'm able to assign the remaining points. So even if you skip, it doesn't mean that you do not have to assign that point. And this general idea applies to many types of weapons. Phaser 3, which is simply a type of phaser that is less powerful. Phaser 2, more powerful than 3, less than 1. For photon weapons that the Federation uses liberally. However, they're a little expensive to fire, and you also need to load them. You spend a turn pouring energy into them to preload them, and then another turn when you can fire them. That means you can fire photon weapons only every other turn. And when you are firing them, you can also choose to fire them in standard mode or to still pour more energy in it to overload them at level +4 or +8. Then you simply look at the range at which you fire, look at the line that indicates the mode that you are using for your torpedo, and that tells you the number to hit. So when you're overloading your torpedoes, they do inflict more damage, but the range is reduced to 8. You roll a d6, and if the number that you rolled falls within the numbers to hit indicated on the right box, then you did inflict a hit, and then that column also tells you the number of hit points it inflicted on the opponent. The same applies for disruptors. The Klingon have a lot of these. Same idea. Look at the range. You can fire it in standard or overload. The disruptors do not need to be loaded from turn to turn, but they do cost 2 energy points to fire. You fire them as standard or overloaded. Look at the column, look at the distance, find the number to hit, roll the die, and then apply the corresponding damage to your opponent. It's a great game. It's just a great game. I loved it from day one that I tried it. I was playing solitaire as I was pushing those little ships and figuring out how to time the sub pulses. I immediately loved it. Even just as I read the rule book, when I understood how the sub pulses worked, because the first time I read it, I was like, what the heck is this? I realized that even though, yes, it takes a bit to get used to time things that way, to resolve movement in that sequence, then just the opportunities that you have, the tactical opportunities, are great. You do not need to love Star Trek to play this game. You simply need to love tactical games with a lot of depth, with a ton of options, with tough decisions, and tactical games that emphasize maneuver. Because this is a triumph of maneuver and challenges about maneuver. From the turn mode that changes based on the speed, and then you can still adjust that. I like the fact that you're committing, in a sense, to a certain gear at the beginning of each turn, and then you can speed up and you can brake a little bit within that gear. So there's a lot of variety of speeds that you can still carve out of your basic speed if you so wish. And then when you combine the ways in which you turn, in which you slip, and how you get to learn the partial movement of your opponent, but not all of it, all these things really make for a very rewarding, very exciting game about maneuver, in which you may get a headache to try to figure out how to send your ship in the position that will allow it to deal a mighty, deadly blow to your opponent without being blown up in return. It may give you a headache, but it is also extremely rewarding when you do manage to perform one of those maneuvers correctly. It really pays off. You have to put energy in learning the system, you have to put energy in implementing the turn, you have to put energy in your engines, but then when you do manage to do something to hit the opponent, to perform a correct maneuver, then the payoff, the moral, emotional payoff, is huge. And maybe I need to put a disclaimer here. I am already a big fan of this game, and while I appreciate the original Star Trek show very much. I'm not a Trekkie in any sense of the word. I never went to a convention. I never dressed up as Kirk or Spock. I enjoyed the old TV show, but I don't think that biased my opinion about the game positively in any way. I just love the maneuvering possibilities the game gives you, which means that you do not need to be a Trek or a big fan of Star Trek to enjoy this. You just need to be a player that appreciates intense, immersive tactical challenges. Simply figuring out the orientation of your ship is a huge thing, because those shields of yours are great, but they will not last forever. And you may have a ship which has perfectly solid shields on 5 of the 6 possible sides, and one of the sides of the shields is completely gone, which means that the opponent can keep pouring hits through that and destroy you. And that means that you need to figure out ways of not offering the weak sides to your opponents. That's another big aspect of the game, another big aspect that packs a lot of tough decisions into the way the game progresses. Energy, oh my gosh, choosing how to budget your energy, it's key, it's enormously important, and it is rewarding because it gives you so many options. You will never be able to do all the things that you want to do. You want to load weapons for next turn, you want to fire all the weapons that you have, you want to reinforce your shields, you want to get a good speed, and then you want to tweak the speed a little bit to make sure that you're not coming in on your target too fast or too fast or too slowly. So many bazillion things that you can do. Tough choices. It always comes down to tough choices. I like really everything about this game, from every single maneuver to the overall flow of the game. Ships start moving around and start to fight against each other. Very often at the beginning you think, well, are these ships all that powerful when it comes to attacking the opponent? I just got a hit that knocked down 5 of my 36 points of shield on this one side, and I have all of these other sides. And then hits start coming from a lot of directions, and some of your shields are particularly weak. Then you start worrying about not offering those shields, and you're still bringing energy from your batteries to reinforce your shields, to regenerate your shields. That's great. Then some hits start coming in and your shields are not good enough, and you get some internal damage. You're like, whoa, that was not so bad. I was so afraid, but after all, that's still a minor thing. And then more damage comes in and your systems start not working anymore. There are immediate effects. The weapons that you get damaged by the opponent, you cannot use. The batteries are damaged, they don't store energy anymore. If all of the areas that you use for your command purposes are hit, then you have disadvantages in maneuvering. Then you really get the sense that all of a sudden you are just trying to pilot a rust bucket in the middle of the space or in the middle of the universe, and things get really tough. But I like that progression, the progression from like, they hit me, not so bad, I'm going to repair that. They hit me again, not so bad, I'm going to repair that. They hit me again, oh, I don't have enough energy to repair that. Oh, they hit me again, I was completing the previous sentence. Hey, stop hitting me. Fun. It really has a climatic sense. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that this is a scenario-based game. You could just put a couple of ships there and have them hit each other and destroy each other, which is a great way of learning the game, but it is not the best thing that the game has to offer. In this game, it's actually kind of hard to destroy the opponent entirely, just to blow the opponent up, especially if you're playing with ships at the squadron level. And sometimes it can get frustrating. I hit you and I hit you and I hit you. And you're still out there firing your little phasers. Maybe you can't move anymore, but you're still doing something. The point, however, when the game really is good, when the game really shines and does what it can do for you, is when you're playing a scenario with objectives that are different from simply destroying your opponent. This is not a game in which the main thing is to destroy the opponent, but it is to cripple the ships of the opponent, to incapacitate the ships of the opponent enough so that you can perform the objective of the scenario. Maybe you're trying to to escort a group of freighters on a certain planet. You're trying to save some scientists from a certain planet, so you need to move fast and close to the planet. You teleport them up, you lower your shields, teleport them up, move away because the opponents are harassing you, hit them a little bit, slow them down, come back, pick up some of the other scientists. Maybe you're trying to study a strange amoeba in a game. There are things going on. It is really about hitting the opponent just enough to prevent the opponent from completing the scenario, which is a completely different thing from just annihilating the opponent. Not only does this add more replay value to the game, because different scenarios will bring different objectives, different flow of the game, but it also makes gameplay more interesting because the objectives that you're looking for are slightly different. Just simply showering the opponent with destruction is not enough. There are times in which you decide you could inflict a great hit against the opponent, but you take another choice because you're using your energy to perform something else. It changes the objectives, it changes the priorities within the scenario, and it adds even one further level of complexity to the game. Complexity in the sense, not in terms of difficulty, how difficult it is to learn the game, but simply how many layers there are to the experience and how many nuances and facets there are to the experience that you have to keep in mind in order to be able to win and to really see the amazing things that this game can do. I love Federation Commander. I really love it. It has immediately beamed itself up to the Olympus of wargaming for me. Definitely is one of my favorite games when it comes to war games. One of my favorite war games. It's one of the most complex that I played. Many of the games that I played are less complex, and I love the fact that actually I'm learning and I'm learning more and more. As I add expansions, I add new ships with new functions and with new rules. Now I am at a point I reached the initial critical mass, and then adding a new way in which a certain ship works, a new way in which a certain weapon works is nothing. And now I'm really getting a sense that I'm exploring a game universe. It is an experience that is thematically rich. Again, you do not need to pick up all the references with Star Trek. Even if you knew nothing about Star Trek, it still feels thematically immersive and rich, simply because there's so much detail, and specific actions are rewarded by specific, detailed, meaningful effects that come out of those actions. It's deep, it's immersive. Sure, it takes some commitment to play, but I found that then the payoff is 1,000-fold what you put in. Federation Commander is a game that I love enormously. I'm definitely going to play it a lot in the future. I'm actually trying to put together a group of players here in town because I was the first one that I knew here in town to play it, and I'm trying to teach it to anyone that I know and that I think has even the slightest chance of being interested in this. I want to play more in the future. Definitely going to explore more in the future. Next, I'm going to film a video about the products that you may want to use to get started with playing the game. And in the future, I will add more videos about maybe further expansions, specific scenarios, things like that. Because Federation Commander is a game that I enjoyed immensely so far, and I think this is a game that is here to stay.